Hello, my name is Jacqueline. Today, my team and I are going to be presenting to you different types of cultural frameworks and their relevance to the business environment. Today, I'll be delving into Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And here with me, I have Jeff, who will be telling you about Tropinard's model and its relation to Toyota. And I also have Angus, who will be giving you some insights into the World Value Survey. So, what is a cultural framework? Well, a cultural framework is a term used to explain traditions, value systems, and symbols that are common in a given society. These cultural frameworks give us a greater understanding of the disparities and similarities between cultures. However, you may ask, why may this be relevant to business? Culture shapes an individual's values and understanding of the world, and thus has a great influence on one's behavior. This in turn largely determines a business's culture and its values. With increasing globalization and M&Es means that there has also been an increasing importance to understand how culture between and within nations has an impact on business and how to cater and modify business practices accordingly. Culture differences between home market and international host markets have been identified as an instrumental variable that influences multiple business operation outcomes. Specifically, export relationships, product acceptance, advertising standardization, and of course, overall firm performance. So here we have an example that demonstrates the importance of cross-cultural management. And this is the failure of Euro Disney. In the first 18 months of operation, Euro Disney in Paris had almost $1 billion in losses. So you may ask, how could an improved version of a highly successful enterprise like Disneyland fare so poorly? Well, a large reason for its failure was its lack of cultural awareness and understanding. There was a massive misunderstanding of French culture and lifestyle. For example, breakfast in the park was not served. And for the French, breakfast is one of the most important moments of the day. Moreover, alcohol was not allowed in the park, despite the fact that the French almost always had a glass of wine with their main meals. And in addition, their staff culture was just not appropriate. The fact that they were always expected to be smiling and kind just did not reflect French attitudes, and staff were not comfortable with these policies. In fact, 10% of employees left within the first 9 weeks of operation. Some going as far to say that Disneyland was brainwashing them with their training. So clearly, cultural factors are crucial for the success of any business, and to disregard and attack others' traditions and customs can be extremely destructive. Before expanding overseas, a company has to do a very deep and targeted research in order to better understand the culture and how that same business can adapt to different kinds of needs of clients and employees in a country. And a way of preparing and doing this research is employing the use of various cultural frameworks. Given a cultural framework cannot give insight into the intricacies of a culture, but rather it can be used as a great foundation and starting point for understanding the general characteristics of a culture. Arguably, the most influential cultural framework is Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions. In 1980, Hofstede presented the results of his extensive study of national cultures based on the data of 117,000 IBM employees from 40 different countries. He extracted 4 dimensions of culture. These were individualism, collectivism, masculinity, femininity, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. Subsequently, and in collaboration with Bond and a group of Asian scholars, a 5th dimension, long-term orientation, was added to the framework. As detailed in last week's lecture, these are the definitions of Hofstede's dimensions. So through analysis of these 5 dimensions, it provides a helpful way of comparing and contrasting different natures' cultures. The ability to compare a nation which you may know little to nothing about to your own with a concrete set of values opens the doorway to an understanding of other cultures. Although renowned for its significance and apparent strong theoretical basis, Hofstede's framework has been criticized for both being flawed and outdated. The dangers of relying on Hofstede's dimensions is that the data was based and extracted from only one company, IBM, and this may not be completely applicable to a whole nation. Furthermore, the contemporary relevance of Hofstede's data has been questioned given that the data was collected in the late 1960s. In addition, I would like you to think about where you may sit on the dimensions of this framework. Is it the same as that of Australia, or would it maybe vary? Most likely, you would not sit exactly where the framework has placed us. This is because you are constantly being influenced by your own subcultures and those around you. A country's culture is fluid, changing constantly as the world moves towards a more interconnected global economy. It is thus not entirely accurate to assume that a nation has only one culture, as many nations have different subcultures and influences. These limitations motivated other researchers to develop more theoretically and empirically sound cultural frameworks. A couple of these frameworks will be explored throughout our presentation. So now I'd like to pass on to Jeffrey, who will be talking about Tropenard's model and its relation to Toyota.
Sometimes working with people from other cultures will go fine. However, often you will find yourself interpreting things differently to another, and thus misunderstanding due to the difference in cultural background. Schopenhauer summarized this ideology and categorized it under this model called the Seven Dimensions of Culture, where he surveyed over 40,000 managers from 40 countries to attain a model as valid and reliable as possible in order to change people's inherent biases and stereotypes. They attempted to discern and simplify the multifaceted nature of culture, ranging from the inner layers, like the language and the way we speak, to the outer layers, the many products of culture, such as the technology we use or the food we eat. This framework aimed to improve the team dynamic between people, allowing them to gain insight into the cultural differences and how they shape decisions and actions. Let me give you an overview of the model. On the one hand, you have a universalistic culture, where people tend to go for rules and treat all cases the same, even if they involve friends or loved ones. Particularism, on the other, shows bias and bends these rules. Exemptions are formed purely because you value relationships over these rules. The second dimension of culture is individualism, where you believe that your outcomes in life are solely dependent on your own choices and achievements, whereas collectivism views society as a whole, believing that the quality of life will be better if we help each other. The next dimension of culture revolves around whether or not you would keep your personal and professional life interconnected. In a specific culture, people draw a clear line in between their work and personal life, being more direct and using clear methods to convey what they want. In a diffusive culture, people believe their objectives can be better achieved when relationships are strong. The affective versus neutral dimension can be summarized by asking, do we show our emotions? Are you perhaps effective in the workplace and like to be more open? Or are you a neutral and rational person in the workplace and control your emotion when problems arise? Next is the achievement versus ascription dimension, which is essentially how do you view status? Do you believe someone's worth is based on their achievements and performance? In comparison, ascriptive people believe that you should be valued for who you are. Power, title, and position matter heavily with these roles defining behavior. Do you like to complete tasks in a very orderly manner and doing it before the deadline? If so, you believe in a sequential culture, whereas people who believe in synchronic culture think multitasking is ideal as things get done little by little at once, where plans and deadlines can be flexible and pushed back. Last but not least, the internal versus external control depicts man's relationship to nature. Is the environment inclining you to act like this? Or are you changing the work environment around you with your actions? All in all, we have a model of culture, 7 dimensions, but it's quite linear. Are you this or are you that? Where on the spectrum do you find yourself in? In fact, a real life business example that has employed this framework is now one of the most successful and leading car industries in the world, which is Toyota. When Kiichiro Toyota first established Toyota in 1937, he wanted to expand his company globally, especially to the US market as it showed the greatest potential. However, this opportunity required teams from both the US and Japan to collaborate and work together. In particular, the cultural discrepancy between both Japan and the US are considered to be the biggest, as they value different things. As you can see from the table, their cultures are considered to be on opposite side of the spectrum for 5 different dimensions. Americans tend to be more open and achievement focused, where they believe if you work hard enough for yourself, you'll succeed, which is essentially the American dream. Comparatively, the Japanese are more courteous and non-confrontational with a more collective approach to things. Evidently, you can tell by using Trompernard's framework, we are able to better relate and learn new cultures, including their behavioral patterns and tastes. This is especially important on a business level, as marketers can then adapt their product and service to suit the culture the country is entering in. They are able to understand the market demand in a new country and implement technologies with adaptation to localized needs. In Toyota's case, they identified young American teens as a key target audience in the US market, and thus built strong consumer confidence for its branded products. However, Trompernard's framework has been subject to many criticisms and contains some dangers when used. The sample size he took in his survey does not actually reflect the real profile of a culture, but rather the profile of managers in an average company. His methodology of study also has not been detailed sufficiently enough to prove his model framework and dimensions accurately enough. Despite this, Trompernard's work has been a significant contribution to research of cultural aspects of all management. Angus will now talk about the World Value Survey.
Hey guys, so I'll be talking about the World Value Survey. So the WVS is also a cultural framework in the sense that it explores differences in people's values and beliefs through a quantitative-based behavior study. However, it differs from Hofstede's and Trompernard's model as it is a continuous framework. What I mean by this is that it gathers time series data through a sample survey that's taken every 5 years, which allows us to look at social and cultural trends between different periods. The survey began in 1981 and was introduced by Professor Ronald Inglehart, who sort of built upon a pre-existing model called the European Values Survey. The project currently surveys a minimum of 1,000 individuals from each of 120 countries from around the world. I have also included their mission statement on this slide, but it didn't really make that much sense to me. So just to clarify, essentially the survey is aiming to make a database that allows scientists and policymakers to understand changes in beliefs, values, and motivations of people from different groups. The actual survey is conducted every 5 years in what are referred to as waves, and each subsequent wave has slightly altered questions surrounding the themes I've included on this slide. And these questions are updated by a group of social scientists from around the world. How these questions are updated, you might ask? Well, I've included a screenshot of some sample questions from the Wave 1 survey, which was taken between 1981 to 1984. It's the one on top. And Wave 7, which is taken between 2017 and 2021. Well, will be taken in 2021, and it's on the bottom. So you can see how questions have been updated to better fit each period. If you look here, this was the same question, but they had different answers. So the one on top, the first wave question, includes extreme left and right wing groups as potentially undesirable neighbors. This makes a lot more sense when you consider the political dichotomy of the Cold War at the time compared to now. On to the next slide, same deal here. The tension during the 80s nuclear stalemate meant that there was a serious concern that conflict was imminent. However, since then, conflict has become a bit more complex, and we can see that development in these questions that address terrorism as well. Now, obviously, just having a bunch of quantitative answers to a series of questions won't do much good in terms of analyzing the impact of cultural factors and what they may mean. This is where the Inglehart and Welzel cultural map comes into play. Basically, this theory asserts that there are two major dimensions of cross-cultural variations in the world. You've got traditional versus secular rational values and survival versus self-expression values. And they convert the results from the survey into a better sort of measure. So just to give you guys a rundown, traditional emphasizes the importance of religion, authority, and traditional family values. Secular rational is basically the opposite. So they don't really see divorce and abortion as unacceptable. Survival values places more of an emphasis on economic and physical security. And self-expression values gives a high priority to environmental protection, has a high acceptance or tolerance of different groups, like foreigners. Here on this map, hopefully it plays. Yep. We can see how over time countries have shifted between prioritizing different values. And a somewhat simplified analysis shows that an increase in standard of living or move to post-industrialization correlates with sort of a shift for the countries from the lower left to the upper right region. Moving on to the pros and cons. Obviously, the pros of the WVS really just boils down to its broad range of uses for everyone who would benefit from using a cultural framework. However, what sets it apart from the others is its continuous nature, which allows us to look at past cultural trends and also predict future ones as well. It also arguably is more specific. On the other hand, recently added countries won't be as analyzed as effectively since there's less data on them. More generally, as a cultural framework, it also suffers from potential biasness, and it doesn't always account for subcultures, which may become an increasing problem due to globalization. For a business example, we weren't really able to find a reliable article from a specific business who would use the WVS, but I did find a publication that took a different approach to how international businesses can use frameworks. It was called the Cross-Cultural Analysis by John Clouet, and basically it broke down the alcohol brewing process of the top 5 beer brewing companies, since each production stage was carried out in a different country. We can see in this matrix on the slide that Clouet believed that each country had different strengths and attributes. Rather than attempt to instill a set of corporate cultures into each operational environment, it basically says that companies should constantly adapt their corporate culture to each section of the production process according to the values and norms the WVS might associate with that country. For example, a country with traditional survival values might be more adept at manufacturing, or like I said before, countries at the opposite end of the spectrum might be better, I'd say maybe more expressive ideas such as design or marketing. So yeah, I guess keep this in mind next time you're brewing alcohol. Anyways, we're going to move on to the discussion phase now. So thanks for listening.